All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to EA Live. I'm Kendra Rainey, the Director of Strategy and Content at Edgar Allan. And I wanted to introduce you to one of my favorite humans on Earth, Juliet D'Ambrosio from Adrenaline.
Right back at you. In fact, I think that is how I would have introduced you. Exactly.
Oh, well, fantastic. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about something that is part of the brand strategy process that I really, really love, and also kind of gives me a knot in my stomach sometimes. But it's the brand naming process. And I feel like brand naming is one of those things that kind of feels to some people a little bit like voodoo. It's obviously not magic, maybe a little bit of science plus like process and creativity, but it feels like this really big deal to a lot of clients that I've worked with who have undergone, like a naming exercise or even individuals who are doing it for a product or a company. And so I've done a whole lot of this in my career, as have you, Juliet, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. A lot. Actively doing it now.
Actively doing it now. Great. And we do a little bit less of that at Edgar Allan than I did in sort of my previous sort of incantations of jobs, but it's still something that I really love. And it's something that's intimidating for a lot of people. Do you find that this particular part of the process of creating a brand is particularly intimidating to some clients?
Yeah, I think it is, mostly because, well, there are two reasons because of it. All brand change is hard. Change is hard for any human being on earth. And when you are doing something as formative as a name, so changing from iteration 1 of the name, version 1.0 to version 2.0 of how your business has evolved, that's scary because you have some connection to, but really attachment to the name in the past. Brand change is scary when it is actually the result of brand birth, really, where you are taking a product from concept into reality. So it's very intimidating. The landscape of trademark and ownability around brands is intimidating. The idea that it is sort of mystical. That's it. Some mystical.
There's some aura of like specialness.
Right, yeah, that goes into it. And finally, I think it's intimidating because it is so incredibly subjective. We are all moved by our gut feelings, and we have gut subjective reactions to names. In some cases, even more so than we do visual expressions of the brand, because we all have names and we all name things all the time. And so there is that level of subjectivity, and especially for clients who are dealing with complex organizations, lots of decision makers at the table, lots of ideas, lots of subjective opinions. How are you going to put all of that together and come up with a name that people like, is ownable, and that represents real change for who you are and a path forward? So yes, highly intimidating, also highly exciting, because it's where really the rubber of brand strategy begins to meet the road in expression. Up till then, it can feel very theoretical. It could feel very brand strategy can feel more like a plan or a path, but this is where it becomes something real that people react to. So it is equal parts thrilling and intimidating.
We actually just like totally jumped into this. I didn't even like ask you like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And how do I know this person? But that's a great explanation of why brand naming might feel so important or might feel so intimidating. Tell me a little bit about your experience with brand in general. I mean, like, I know you do naming, but what else and what's your kind of legacy, your pedigree here? So.
Oh, my legacy. Well, I'll use a line that I like to use. I use it really all the time. Feel free to steal it, which is that I've been doing the work of brand positioning and brand strategy since the 1900s, which is true because I started actually in the 1900s. So I am the chief brand officer at Adrenaline. We are a brand experience company. So I oversee the development of all forms of our brand experience, from strategy, positioning, naming, identity, and then through to the built experience, how physical environments, how our brands get expressed through physical environments, very often in retail spaces. Before that, I have been working in the areas of brand strategy, naming, identity, and positioning at design firms, strategy firms, for advertising since the 1900s for my career. I have also taught, and that's a very important part of my biography and probably my favorite part. Taught aspiring creatives that touch brand from all different aspects: design, photography, writing, illustration, etc. So that's who I am. That's sort of where I come from. In the course of my career, I've been lucky enough to work with a real range of B2B and B2C. And so on the B2C side, that kind of naming is its own category, because you're working with different you're entering very often a much more crowded landscape. And so ownability is something that you have to sort of think a lot more carefully about. And that's really where lawyers play a bigger role in the process. B2B, it's a little bit more open, a little bit more ownable, but it can also be a little bit more difficult because it's less concrete. There's less of a thing you're bringing to the market, and it's more of a service. You're representing a service proposition, etc. So loved the ability to think about brands, their strategy, their positioning, how we set them up for competitive success in the marketplace to be meaningful and resonant and magnetic to the people that they're trying to reach. And so naming is a part of that, and working with brand names from a whole variety, from the product naming role all the way up to business divisions naming, to whole cloth. We are naming a $10 billion organization, for example. So lucky enough to see and have gotten to touch really the range of how that comes to life. And Kendra, you and I met probably in the 1900s, maybe in the early 2000s, as part of the beginning of your career in brand strategy,
right?
And closer to the beginning of mine also. And we've worked together and had sort of parallel paths and a great friendship all along the way too.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. And yeah, so you were if I would say probably the first person that I ever worked on a naming project or a strategy project with, and
Yep.
as a junior to you. So
Yep.
if I'm doing something, it probably comes from somewhat from what you did. So we do things probably fairly similarly.
Good. Formative then. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you talked about sort of, the different types of, B2B, B2C, how they're different across those things. How important is a brand's name really in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, I think it is the single most important asset of a brand, um, because there are all sorts of levers that go around and enrich the experience of a brand, the memorability of a brand, the ability um, for a brand to stand out and connect with the people that it needs to attract. But I say that the brand name is so critical. It's so important because it becomes your calling card in every place that your brand will live, including in the verbal sense. When people are talking about the brand, you're not always going to have a chance to show your logo. You're not always going to, when you type in a URL, your logo
Mm-hmm.
does not appear there. So the brand it's really the hardest working part the brand name is the hardest working part of the brand identity. And because it has to live in every time the brand comes up, the name is going to be attached. And that's just not true about the tagline, the photography, the
Mm-hmm.
colors, the digital experiences, et cetera. So I think it is utterly critical. And that's another reason why, there really is an art and a science. And I've thought about this in relation to brand name websites, or like brand name generators that you could just like,
Oh yeah.
and that's a thing that exists. And there's a reason it costs $100 to go that route. That's like, and there's probably a very good, there's room in the market for that, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a reason that you invest in a brand name.
So, well, let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, I guess maybe there's so many questions in that. I'll start here by saying that what I always like to say is that brand name it's incredibly important, but if you're not building the rest of the world around it, it's kind of, it can be sort of a non-issue. It can be sort of dead in the water. I mean, like, think about this, like, nobody knew what an Uber was until they told you what an Uber was, like with the rest of that world. Oops, I just hit my mic. So I think sometimes that makes that decision so insanely scary to some clients that it's like they get analysis paralysis. And so how how do you help clients work through that problem? How do when you've got this like batch of great stuff, you've really done a lot of thinking about it. It hasn't come from a name generator. It isn't just something that's popped up on their screen. How do you help them work through that fear of picking the wrong thing? Uh-oh. Did we lose her or did we lose me?
You hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Yeah, you're back.
Oh, good. Okay. Hopefully
You
I
were
stay back. Okay. Well, great question. It is a real fear for clients. And I have found two strategies to be particularly helpful. One is that I ask clients um, to sleep on it. And that's really it sounds like very simple advice. But the idea that when you sleep on it and what you wake up the next day, or 3 or 4 days later, the name that you remember, the name that sort of speaks to you the most, that's the name that you sort of trust your gut on, that because your gut is really just your intuition, and your intuition is your subconscious working like behind the scenes to ultimately lead you to the right direction. And to trust in that, and you really have some confidence there. That's the woo-woo answer. That's like the walk,
That's the magic and voodoo answer. Yes.
The client psychology answer, but I do believe it's true. The second answer is that, especially when we're coming down to, and I just worked with through a client and their board with this very question. There were two names and they were equally great. And there were sort of equal factions around the executive team or the board team that loved both names equally. And we say, we can talk until we're blue in the face about the names that we think are strong, the names that you think are strong. Let's ask people your market. Let's ask the audience. And we just do, it does not have to be a lengthy process, but testing.
Yep.
And typically testing, what we recommend is not your current customer set, your current customer base, but testing prospects, testing the people you want to be your customers, and sharing that name. And I have never not been surprised by the findings. I have never not, even if testing reveals that, ultimately the name that we've recommended, that is our company favorite, that is our recommendation, there are still nuances to what we learned through that we wouldn't have expected, that really help to do two things. One is release the fear, saying, yep, this is right. And anytime somebody gets nervous, say, look at this chart. Remember, 75% of people love this name. This is the right direction for you. It helps to release the fear, but it also helps us in the next stage, which is identity development. Because we have a more nuanced understanding about what people are hearing or associating with names, we can use that as sort of a leaping off point for how we're going to then take the next steps for how that brand experience comes to life.
That is a really great point, actually, in terms of like the order of events in brand in general. You just said something that I believe really strongly, that the name should come first, right? That if you at all can do that, you're going to get so much information out of that exercise, that it's going to lead you, as you said, in some of the right directions, and help you ask the right questions as you're moving forward with the rest of the strategy.
Yeah.
We have a question from the gallery, Marilyn. Hello, Marilyn, by the way. We haven't spoken in a while. She wants to know, do you usually offer a client a few names to choose from? And this is a great segue to talking about process, but let's answer her first, then we'll talk about how does this whole thing even work when you're going through the process of naming?
Yeah, great question, Marilyn. Yes, typically offer clients no fewer than, buckle up, 10 names. And the reason why is because I often call, and this leads into the process discussion, but naming is a process of heartbreak. It is a process of getting your heart broken again and again. And what I mean by that is you're finding a name that's ownable. So it's one thing to come up with great names, and then it's another thing to get your client to choose of that list of great names that you have. And then it's yet another thing to make sure that they're ownable. So we typically will present clients no fewer than 10. We've gone up to 25 names in the past. And the reason we do that is so that the client team can then work through a process of a short list. So they have a short list of 3 to 5 that we then recommend they take to their IP attorney. We'll do vetting. We'll test for anything you can do on the internet. So
yeah, what are some of the things that you can do without a lawyer, just out of curiosity?
USPTO is you test that for in the class. You need to do a little bit of research, but the class of the product or service that you are looking to gain a name from. Trademarkia is an incredible site that pulls from USPTO data, but also from other sources. Good old Google, because Google will sometimes surface things that have not yet made it to the trademark site, but are in the process of it. Google plus region, Google plus anything that is additional to those names. So those are the steps. I mean, you really have to vet it again, vet it a third time. Once we're reasonably comfortable with the answers to all of that it seems clear or clear enough, From that shortlist, then the client goes to their own IP attorney and then gets a letter of opinion. So the attorney, which typically costs about $1,500 a name, but it's worth the investment for the client to make. We don't pay for it. The client pays for that. $1,500 per name to get the letter of opinion where the IP attorney says, yep, given everything I know, all the much more rigorous detail that they have into the process, we think that you will likely get clearance on this name from USPTO.
It's defensible is what I usually get.
It's defensible. And which is great. And then you're off to the races. And then from that, typically in that process, even if we've done the most amazing vetting work, we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, still there are things we can't see. We're not, that's why we're not IP attorneys, thank God, that they will often, that name of 5 to 3 will become 2, often will become 1. And there's your winner. So that's sort of the why behind presenting multiple options.
And so that is kind of the end of the process, right? So you've had your group of 10, you've had, shortlisted a few down, you don't want to pay 10 times 1,500 of it every single one of those. Probably most clients do not. So you've sent it off, you've gotten clearance, you've done all that. What about the beginning of the process? How does this start? And I think my first question would be, who should be part of a naming exercise? Is it just the C-level? Is it the customer service folks? Is it the secretary at the desk? Is it the security guard? Is it everybody? Who should on the client side be part of the very beginning of this?
Well, I think part of the very beginning of the naming always doesn't start in a vacuum. We never say like, "Hey, we need a name," and we're off to the races. It's always a development and a sort of natural development of a brand strategy process where we have either recommended a rebrand, so a renaming to represent a new positioning in the marketplace, or a client will come to us, and this happens a lot in the case of M&A, where both legacy institutions understand that they can't move forward, or sometimes they can move forward with one of the existing names, or they need to come up with an entirely new name. So the process, or a new product is coming online from an existing master brand name. But the process always begins with a strategy, with either a brand strategy, a product positioning strategy, which then translates into a creative strategy. So the creative strategy then become, where we are defining tone, we're defining design principles, all of which ultimately lead to the naming brief. In terms of who's involved on the client side, it's almost always sort of a more of a leadership level, those that would be involved in brand strategy. We include voices from all sides of the organization, front-facing staff for service organizations, brand sales or product managers, anyone who's sort of has a public face that carries that name across. But it is typically, especially for an organization, it's C-suite, it's executive leadership. It is anyone involved in CX, often those involved in EX. So those are sort of the core players. Typically, it works best when we come down to, we get lots of input on the brand strategy, the naming process itself. We like to have a little bit of a smaller team. So that's the CMO, or anyone sort of involved in marketing leadership or marketing direction, the brand or product manager, and then and that's it. So we want a smaller team involved as the decision-making body. Once that decision is made, then we work with them to socialize the name, the decision with the broader team. And often with a board who needs to, we need to gain, I'm not going to use the word alignment, because that word is just so jargony.
I'm so tired of that word.
Yeah.
Let's think of another one.
Yeah, but we need to need to get them to accept and buy off on the name. So it's a long-winded answer, but it's hard to say just who's involved on the client side, because it's almost always typically that outgrowth of strategy, which is sort of a broader group.
Yeah, totally. No, exactly. I know that in the internal side, at least the way that we do it, if we have a project that needs some, we'll just call it like firepower on the creative side, we'll have people that aren't just writers contribute too, because I love hearing our, like we have like one particular UX guy, I'm going to call him out, Zane, who is a fantastic person to ask for naming ideas.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I'm like, I always want him to say, like, just pop in for like a half an hour, just like see what you think, or asking design focused people or people that are visual thinkers. You get a whole different kind of world of possibilities. But so how do you start? Like, what's the very first thing? You've got that, you've got the strategy in place, kind of what cardinal direction you're maybe going with this. Do you just sit down and just like start jotting things on a piece of paper? Do you use a spreadsheet? Are you searching around on thesaurus.com? And like, what are you doing? And what's the first sort of output of that push? The
first output, that's a great question. I totally agree with you on getting lots of people's input. You and I both know Justin. Who's like also, and that it's not his discipline, it's not like supposed to come out of his brain, but he contributed. He like named some amazing organizations in working with him. So totally agree with you on that. We like to engage as many people from the creative team as we can like gain scope for from the client. It's typically led by strategy. We involve copywriters, designers, creative directors, anyone who, the account people. Nobody owns good ideas. Like good ideas come from everywhere. But to answer your question, how we start is we will typically do what comes out of a brief. What we like to just call them territories, just to give a little bit. Sometimes it's easier to be very creative if you're inside a box than if the box is undefined. And so, and there you're kind of, you're working so hard to figure out like, what should the box be that I don't know, you can spin your wheels a little bit. So we'll typically define territories and say, we want some to like really dial up the idea of I don't know, creativity, and some really dial up the idea of
organization, dial up the idea
of relationship, or whatever, really dial up the idea of the region, whatever those are, just to give people some relevant boxes to play in. And then the truth is, great naming processes that I've seen sort of bounce back and forth between a dynamic of individual effort and then collective jamming. And the individual effort really is just, yes, it is sitting down, letting your mind wander, and writing down what comes to mind. I often will come up with names when I'm on a run. Well, I call it a run. Really, it's a like kind of a fast walk. But I just use my voice memo on my phone that as I'm thinking through things, I'll just capture it very quickly. So that's a lot of just like free association of creativity. Yeah. And then there's like the wormholing, where you will type in that word and you'll see what other words come up that are associated with it, either in the thesaurus or the dictionary. So that like helps to lead you down different paths. There's always the tried and true, like, mythology or Greek or Roman, or like, especially for English language names that you're going back to the canon for a lot of those. But I think it starts with free association. We call it just our unedited ugly dump list. It's a big Google document. Everyone contributes to it. I actually think it's helpful to not see whose is whose, like, so that it just becomes a mismatch. And then we have our first meeting where we'll sort of where we'll go through and talk about the names that we really like on that list and sort of talk about what the possibilities are, what the possibilities aren't there. And then we'll do that same exact process maybe three times, where there's more individual effort, or maybe we're like, oh, we haven't, thought about geology names or whatever. Let's explore that. So, and then, wash, rinse, repeat, come back to the table, and then ultimately work as a team to get down to a short list of maybe 50 that we then put through the paces of our initial trademark and URL search.
Right. Yeah. That's the first kind of round of like ownability vetting, because you're going to cull 20 of those just because somebody easily. You didn't know, or there was a terrible connotation with this thing. That happens every once in a while. You're like, oh, I didn't know that meant that.
We've had some, or just like, different linguistic or language associations where we've had names that were front runners, where a native Spanish speaker was like, that sounds angry to me. That sounds angry in Spanish, or, whatever those things are. So just going in eyes wide open and really making sure that your name doesn't have some like secret atomic bomb inside of it that you can't see, that would make it a terrible name.
Well, and that's why the group is important, I think. And so, because everybody feels very strongly emotionally about the way certain words sound to them, right? Yes. Or what they call up in their mind. It's like you date a guy named Jeremy who's just a complete asshole, and you hate all Jeremys from then on, and you have no other reason. There are lovely Jeremys out there, but and that's, I know no Jeremys, so I
well, that's the point about subjectivity. You're like the creators of the names. It's not just the client side. Creators of names we all have our own subjective attachments or
cultural attachments, or associations, or definitely. We actually, you were talking about Spanish speaking. We did a project for the Candler School of Ministry last year that was specifically for their new Spanish language kind of programming. And so fortunately we have a large amount of native Spanish speakers on our staff. So it was a really fun project to collaborate with them and to hear me pitch a name and they'd be like, oh no. Or they would say something and would like, well, I don't know if that really translates. I mean, it was very fun to try to ride that line. And we ended up doing naming presentations in English and Spanish and sort of
that's so cool.
So fun.
Yep. That's so cool. We work a lot with financial institutions, and depending on where they are in the world, Texas, California, et cetera, they will often have sort of fully bilingual brand. Their brand lives in a bilingual way. So they'll have a Spanish version or an English version of sites, et cetera. So names in that case are extra important to, make sure that they translate well. Not only from like it's different from just like a Spanish English dictionary or Google Translate, because of the connotation part of it. So, because sometimes it'll there's like a hidden meaning that you don't know.
Or regionality. I mean, even again with Spanish, totally different, lexicons depending on, where in the world you're speaking from. I mean, and, same in the US to some degree, things that mean different things in the South as opposed to Midwest or whatever, at least have more popularity. But I was going to ask you what you talked about, I think there are probably lots of, here's what I asked. How do you like to present names to clients? How do you like to do that unveiling? Because it's one of the last, like I love doing brand presentations because they are a little bit like theater in some ways, and you get to tell a really good story, and you get to get people this is this is going to sound ridiculous, but I love it if I can get somebody on the client side to get a little misty, by the time we're done, with the story, and they can be really connected to it. But how do you present names? What's the kind of the format that you think works for you?
Yep. Good question. Also agreed that it is my goal that someone's going to cry. If you're not crying, then
I
I've
love
like
it, man.
failed to tell a good story about that, about what, whatever it is. On the naming side, people don't usually cry.
No, you have strong responses, but they're usually like,
Right.
ugh.
Okay, couple things. What I like to do is always give context and do a tiny bit of education about, and I just call it what makes a great name. And, great names are memorable. Great names don't try too hard. Great names are easy to say and spell, like, sort of setting the bar and using, using good Google, Apple, like what, names that people can understand or relate to, and talking a little bit about why that's a great name. Then a very quick recap of the strategy. Here's our position. Here's our tone. Here's what we're trying to achieve. And then, but not spending too much time on that, because people are like, come on, lady, like, what, I want to get to the name. Like, what's the good point? We show the name on black and white type, black slide, white slide, black type on its own. That's it. They just see the name.
Yep.
And then we do a name plus URL. So you can see how that name lives in the most common way that people come across it. And then name plus URL plus a few sort of rationale bullet points. It is hard to, the way I present rationale is always, here's what we love about this name. It does this, this, and this. I agree. Matt Rollins and I are executive creative director. I think I might have stolen this from him, or he stole it from me. It's hard to tell at this point, but you really can't talk about a name or a logo too much, because people are going to have that reaction to it. So what we can say is, here's what I think, here's what we think about it. Here's what we see when we see this name. Here's why we think it might be an interesting choice for you. And then that's it. And then at the end, obviously there's a recap slide, and that's the best part of it, because that's discussion. Sometimes it's always awkward at first, because clients don't know what to say. They don't know what to talk about. You just sort of, and that's okay that it doesn't, but the more time you leave for that conversation around the name potentials, they're looking at a total of 10. And sometimes if they are like really having trouble giving you feedback, you can, or even reacting, you can say something like, you definitely need to think about this. This is, you got to sleep on it. But what names do you hate? What really rubs you the wrong way? What can we just like get the little, little cane and yank it out of there?
What's the worst thing we could do here, or the thing that would make you least happy, or the worst idea?
Exactly.
is always one of my favorite questions.
Yes, and it really gets people talking, and then that will turn them into what they like. I love it when CEOs or whoever, like the highest ranking leader in that room is, doesn't speak first, because whatever they say is just going to set, just sort of sets the tone, and really encourages their team to add feedback. Because I think that's, you get better discussion that way, if nothing else.
So you mentioned a couple of different things in here. I wanted to ask, do you like made up names? Like, you talked about them being like ownable or readable, or ownable for sure. Made up names are super ownable usually, but I always, back when we called people on the phone, I thought, if you can't imagine somebody answering the phone and saying, hi, this is blah, blah, blah group, and people not being able to understand what you said or write it down correctly, that you probably wasn't a particularly understandable name. But what about made up names? Like, when are they appropriate? Names that are like totally not real names.
That's a really hard question. To answer your question directly, I don't like made up names, mostly because they will often come across as they just are trying too hard. They're a little odd at first. They can be weird. I like when names do need to be made up. I will often lean towards or guide clients toward compound names of real words, blue hawk or something like
Yeah.
that, or blue spaghetti. That's not a good example, but
Blue
names that have-
spaghetti is interesting.
yeah, I mean, it sounds like
Could be
it
for something, who knows?
could be. Yeah, it could be. So something in the Play-Doh variety, but
Right.
but so that is where I will often lead. Or more often proprietary spellings of a real name or a real word, mostly because I just think that you lose the aspect of relatability and memorability at the offset, and you have to work twice as hard
That's a
to
good point.
gain that through all the other levers of brand. That said, there is a role for made up names, and according to naming science, these are called fanciful names. I don't know if you've heard that, but
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
made up,
I just think of them as made up names.
I made up
yes,
names,
I
but
can understand.
fanciful
Yeah.
names can be really great if you have just an incredibly crowded marketplace. But I think fanciful names are, again, going to always be most successful if they sound like or look like an existing name. That's
If they're like close to a real word.
they're
but not
close
quite.
to a real word, not an existing word. So yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I was just curious. I mean, and that just sort of brings up another thing. Like there's all these different sort of types of names. If you want to think about there's descriptive names,
Yep.
ones that are describing a
Yep.
specific, functional or physical attribute. There's evocative names, ones that are meant to like make you feel something specific, or even like if it's the word itself, it doesn't mean love. It feels, whatever the word is, feels warm or connective, or, if you want to use that as an example, your fanciful names, you just gave me a new word. I just usually call them made up. And historic names, that's another one that I like to explore. And then you mentioned a few things that are like more kind of genre based, like science. Or I like music because it's Latin roots, and then it has a lot of times it sounds very, depending on what the client is or what the brand is, fluid or beautiful or poetic, or
lyricism to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Whit had a really great question, and I wanted to pull it up. He's wondering, what project did you work on that was the most fun from either century?
Oh God. Okay. Well, I'm just going to go with my first gut. We named a company that is on the forefront of genetic engineering. So they are in the world of biomedical or truly genetic engineering. They are utterly brilliant people. They are in Northern California. They came to us, and their initial name was like DNA 2.0. That was their name. And these genius founders,
It's very blah.
one of them was actually named Jeremy, to bring this all, to tie it all back into a bow.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Yeah, genius founders. I don't think he will ever hear this, but had an incredibly complex product offering, a business that they had built from sort of $0 to $10 million. They are literally at the forefront of how both sort of medicine, but also science, in ways that, genes are used, which I learned about this in ways that I could never have imagined, like to make cheese, for example. Like the food industry uses genetic engineered testing of materials.
I think someone remade some kind of woolly mammoth steak the other day.
Yeah. I saw that on Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of all the things to do with the woolly mammoth, like, I don't know that steak would
turn it into a burger,
that steak would have been my first thing. But that was the most fun because Jeans are everything. They're at the very sort of beginning of all life, of the expression of life. The world of sort of science and engineering feels very relevant and fresh and exciting, and it feels like it will be for a long time. Long story short, we named this company Atum, ATUM.
Ooh, okay.
You can go and check out and build a beautiful identity. It's atom.bio. But Atom is the Egyptian god of all matter. And it is not one of those gods. So it's a real word.
Yeah.
It also sounds like a real word. And
that's like a win-win kind of
like
word.
Meta,
I can see why that. Yeah,
they were going
like that.
They at very first that's not the name that they chose, but that was our recommendation. And after I think 2 weeks, we got on the phone. We thought we were going to get fired because we hadn't heard about them. And Jeremy, the owner, was like very British, very scientific. I love Adam, or that was German, actually. Sorry, I can't do good British, but so they chose it and went all in. And you don't have to know that it was the Egyptian god of matter and creation for it to carry that meaning across, to work globally, which is really important for the ability because they sell globally. And it was just wicked fun.
That is such a great name because it hits on all of the things that you want a really good name to hit on, at least that I do. That it's 2 syllables, super easy to say. It's easy enough to spell. It's rooted in something really cool that has story, but it's also not like obvious story. So you got to do a little digging to get there, but you don't even have to because it has all the right feeling of the industry, the vibe of the brand, all of those things kind of packed into it. So gosh. Amazing. I love that.
That was really fun. And what was really, this happened pre-COVID, was to see how this company and this brand has used the platform to just raise they have a different presence. They stand out in a way that they hadn't before. They were able to do a lot of amazing storytelling, especially during COVID, where their product helped, was part of both therapeutic solutions, but also in testing. And I think that's like the beauty of all names is that it makes you more relevant. And by relevant, I just mean meaningful to the people that matter to you, whoever that is.
Is there an industry or a product type that you kind of cringe that you would have to name something in it, or that is less fun for you?
No, I really, I maybe like Kendra, I'm sure you're familiar with this. We've named catheters before.
That was
that
was quite a thing. Yes,
we've named some home catheter solutions. So I think there's a little less room for fun and creativity there. But no, I think all naming there's so much room for creativity. There's so much room for challenge. I guess the only thing is if the box is too small. If a client comes to us and says, well, it has to start with the letter P, it has to it has to use the product attribute or feature or something in it, I think that would be something I would cringe. But in terms of category or industry or sector, I think it's all.
I am cracking up because our client from that job said, yes, you did.
You did.
And that was like a decade ago.
Shout out,
hi, Brian.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love it. and Ward, and sorry, and Wit is noting that as well. So, yes, that was, and we did a lot of work for those guys. And actually, naming it was maybe not like the most creative exercise, but it was working for that kind of company is an example for me of why I love what we do, because you get to dig really deeply into something that you would have literally never had any knowledge of, beforehand, and get really kind of, into the details of it and get to, understand like an entire world in a sense that you would have never been exposed to. And so I love the fact that I get to like bounce around in my job and learn about catheters and porcine collagen implants, and then bounce to commercial real estate, and then bounce to high stakes law, and then bounce to quilting fabrics and NFTs, and and all the things that we've done sort of with Edgar Allan beyond that. Spanish language ministry, it's just like, it's wild. Google doesn't know what to think of me with my search results, but
aren't we the luckiest? I always
yeah.
really think that this career, if you are curious, if you just are curious as a human being, sort of full stop, this is, I'm almost 50 years old. I'll be 50 in a few months, and I've been doing this since the 1900s. And I'm excited every single day. Like, there is not a day that I don't wake up and I'm not like, oh, I'm kind of excited about what I'm going to get to do, largely because of exactly what you just mentioned. And now adrenaline works almost entirely with financial services companies. And the difference there is because I've had the sort of the breadth of experiences. And now that it is focused on a single sector, what's really interesting from both a strategy but also a naming standpoint is that every bank and credit union on earth sells checking accounts, they sell savings accounts, they sell mortgages, they sell HELOCs, they sell the same thing.
Right.
They largely have a branch network, and they largely have some kind of mobile banking device or online banking. They largely will have an ATM network. Some of them have easy, cool app features, but there's almost no differentiation across the industry. And so from a brand standpoint, that means we have to dig extra hard to find what is that gem of truth that could only ever be about that bank or that credit union, that we can then lift, we surface it, we polish it, we lift it up, we make it meaningful, and then we express it through name, through identity, and then through all the ways it comes to life. So it's like, there's just as much challenge and the search for variety, meaningful variety within that as well.
I personally have, and I bet you haven't either, but I just want to ask, have you ever been stumped? You're like, God, there is no story here. Like, it's just that nugget that's like beyond the checking and banking and HELOCs, have you ever has it ever been so hard that you're just like, I don't know if there's anything here to talk about?
No, I have not. Yeah, that is a good question. I'm searching back through
I'm thinking that too. There have been some that have been really, really difficult. Like after you do your
really difficult
fifth
typically
law
those
firm,
are in the B2B,
or whatever.
B2B space, where there is just, I think what it is that when I've come across that, it's like there's so much like professional veneer on top of it, or jargon, or that you have to dig extra hard to be like, what's the there, because that's not how it's just harder to surface. I don't think I've ever been entirely stumped, but some are definitely like way harder to find than others.
Yeah, and that actually goes along with what Marilyn is asking here, which is, she says there's room for creativity, and now it seems we have to work harder to find it. And I would say that if I was asking about a group of things that I am wary of naming recently, it's med tech companies, because there is just a crap ton of them, and anything you can imagine that is even remotely connected, someone has trademarked it. Like it is gone. The low-hanging fruit is often taken. Do you find that too? And I said the low-hanging fruit is almost, in some industries, it's almost always taken. But I guess my question to tag on to that is, how do you get your client over the hump of wanting something that is low-hanging fruit and to that next level, to that next, like, the better creative answer?
Yeah, well, the immediate response that I would have is you don't show them the low-hanging fruit. That's like, that is not even part of the discussion. First
You
of all,
never
it's
show
not,
ringers. Never.
yeah, it's not available. And second of all, that's not like, I would never want to present something that I wouldn't be like, this is a great, what, even if it's not my like subjective choice, but it wouldn't be a great
Sure.
name, and that we get our clients to past that by not even opening up the discussion. And I agree with you about med tech, but also tech. Period.
Yeah.
Fintech is the same
Yeah.
exact way. Back before the whole FTX, back in the before times of like 8 months ago, when crypto was a big thing, and we were involved in some sort of naming exercises around crypto, and that was very difficult. That was almost an entirely sort of occupied landscape. So yeah, that one would be really hard. I don't know how I would like attack it at this point.
Yeah, I think that, what you're talking about with having, an idea of brand strategy first, of being able to like call back to like, what's the thing that's really at the root of this that
Yep.
we're trying to evoke with the name or with the strategy in general, with the story. That's where you've got to start. I mean, because even with like your 15th ambulance chasing law firm,
Yep.
there's something. I mean, there's something underneath that makes it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a piece of history. There's a
Yep.
one, just law decision that they made that you can kind of point to. Yeah, that's
which is
it's gotta be
why great brand strategy is often sort of connected to asking great questions. That's it. It like sort of comes down to, how do you know the right question to ask to get at that piece of history or that weird anecdote that
right.
that is where it exists. And so I just think, again, like, there are very few like places you can go to become. There really is not a college program that like spits out brand strategists, but
No.
but there are, if you are curious and a critical thinker, this is the path for you if you want to explore it, I think.
Yeah. You kind of,
those questions are, I think, are important.
Well, yeah, you kind of answered a little bit. I was going to ask you, like, okay, so yes, there is, like, far as I know, there is no program that touches on like churning out great brand strategists. How did you fall into this line of work?
Yeah, I fell into it, I think,
and we've got about 3 minutes.
Yeah,
so I'm just saying, in the short version.
I'm keeping an eye. In the most natural way possible for me, which is out of journalism. And journalism is all about asking great questions and finding stories and staying curious. But realizing that I didn't want to just write, writing about a topic, an idea. That in my case, it was writing for a music magazine. I was not fulfilled. That wasn't the whole story for me. And there were two things. One, in my starting career, I was shoved into an art department. That's where my office was. I had to sit there. So I was exposed to, I worked literally right next to the creative director. And I was exposed to the idea of design and really visual storytelling, which led into brand storytelling. I did a couple like freelance projects, which led me from sort of pure writing into actual annual reports, which is the act of corporate storytelling. I was like, oh, that's for me. Now I can like bring together visual, concept, design, writing, language as content really as a part of design. And then ultimately just transitioned into a role as a copywriter. And then copywriters either go two paths. They go strategy or they go ECD or, CD. And I took the strategy role and have never looked back.
Yeah. And honestly, for me, if anybody's interested in my story, it was that
I'm interested.
Well, oh yeah, I mean, you were there.
But I know it. Yeah.
No, I Googled copywriting in school and ended up at Portfolio Center. And then met you. And so I was,
Yep.
I did never want to be an ad writer. I didn't want to write billboards or campaigns or anything like that. And I was always good at and interested in sort of the intersection of journalistic media and narrative writing. And it was just a really good fit. And so that's how I got there. And then we ended up working together. So
Yeah.
that's it. But this has been an incredibly fun conversation. And I am so glad that you had time to talk with me today about this. Thanks for everybody that joined us. Marilyn, Brian, Whit, Raymar. Hey, Raymar. And yeah, thank you, Pamela. And glad that you were able to come and listen. And if you have any other questions, I think the YouTube channel, you can probably put some up on there, or also hit us up on LinkedIn or Twitter. But thanks so much, Juliet. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I loved it. Highlight of my week. Thanks.
Awesome.